Oh my gosh. I have so much. I'm gonna have to pare it down. First, okay, Pepper, we've got to get you to tell that story of taking the stairs. Because I'm with Curt. I've heard that story so many times, and every time I hear it, when you say, she said, what happened to the elevator, I'm just like, oh my gosh.
It's crazy.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, there were so many things. Like, Pep, when you said you guys would tell it to 3 people, and then Curt, you're like, the stories are told to be heard. And then you say in the book, Curt, you don't like it when you're telling a story and people get distracted. And I thought, yeah, no, I don't like that either. And it's like, it's okay. So I'm going to narrow it down to 2 things. I have a story. I actually have 2, but they're short. This week, I realized I double booked. I told one person I would do something, and
it's like when I walk out in my waiting room.
Oh, oof.
And I have 2 patients there at the same time, and I'm like, I'm so screwed.
We're having group therapy today.
Oh my god.
I don't know if I've told you guys about confessional communities, but we're going to do that today. And see how you do with this little shift.
Oh, yeah. So
yeah, and so at first, like I didn't realize it straight away. Like when I started to think, oh no, and I'm flooded, right? I'm like,
yeah.
And then as I'm looking at this calendar, at that calendar, I'm looking back at text messages. I'm like, yeah, you did. But it's gradual. And then I start thinking of each party involved, anticipating their reaction. What am I going to do? How can I possibly do both? And then I thought about Robert when he first came into your office. And at some point you said, are you open to discovering how your mind works and how, and immediately that took me to curiosity. It took me out of his depression. And so then when I double booked, I'm like, why is all this coming up? Like, why is this seems so devastating to me? And coming from curiosity, it was such a better experience than everybody's going to hate me. And then I can't really do anything, because if everybody hates me, then I lose all my support. So I'm just going to say no to everyone. That's what I'm going to say. No, because I don't want a chance double booking. It's wild. It's wild.
Yeah. I had a thing this week, yesterday, actually. I was driving down my street coming home, and Hope and I had to take her to the doctor or something. We were coming home, and my neighbor and his wife were walking down the street. So I rolled down the window and I was teasing him a little bit because he just retired. He's about 63, he just retired. And I was asking him what it was like to have such a stress-free life and all this. And he just kind of looked at me in a nonverbal way. And I knew something was wrong. And he said, well, we've got some stresses, and I'll tell you later. So I went down to the mailbox later on that day, and he came out and we stood in his driveway, and he said, I didn't really want to talk about this in front of Hope because he said, I was diagnosed last week with prostate cancer. I've got 3 tumors. And my first reaction was to cuss, and I did. And I thought it was appropriate. And I thought, but I sat and I listened to him, and he was visibly shaken. It's relatively new news to him, and he's very, very nervous about this, and he's trying to gather information. So I just started asking him questions and just trying to be present and listen to him, because you can't say anything in that moment that's going to make anything better or anything like that. But I do think, and I think that, it's kind of what we were talking about. The act of just listening and hearing, empathetically hearing the story, asking questions, engaging, and then praying and saying, we will continue to pray about this. And there obviously doesn't fix anything, but I could feel sense a bit of a crack of peace in him as we had this conversation.
Yeah.
And
well, I think I'm just so struck by the nature of how our, I mean, we might, if you were to kind of like bring this really down to boots on the ground from a neurobiological and interpersonal standpoint, when your director made her comment to you, see, she's not just stating a fact. In her question, what happened to the stairs, or what happened to the elevator? Something wrong with the elevator. It's a question, but she's also naming, my goodness, you've worked hard at this. Because unless you work really hard at what you at all the hard work that you did before you went on stage, like, you wouldn't have been able to do this in such a way that I would notice that the elevator was off. There's this sense of like she's joining you in the place where it's painful, where it's hard, where it's effortful. You join your neighbor. And it is in that place that when it's the withness in our pain, in our suffering, that opens the door to telling the story differently. Because otherwise I'm just locked in my own private room where the story just becomes like this, soundproof booth where it just like goes around and around and around and around in this booth, and it doesn't get out to anybody like it. And I'm stuck with me. And the story I'm telling, but the moment that I say it to you, and you, because like we say, there's certain words, certain cuss words, that if we didn't have them in our vocabulary, we'd have to make them up.
Right. I agree.
That's
we
kind of somebody did.
Right. And we kind of have a hierarchy of the ones that we're like, oh, this is like, this is this is single A, this is double A, this is triple A, this is major league.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all know what the major league word is.
Sure.
But if we didn't have that word, like, we'd have to make up one that would and if we could, we'd make up a word that would be worse than it. It would be harder than it, because it's how we join in our grief with someone who themselves don't have words for their fear and their sadness. And, like you were saying, Pep, like, if you're going to perform that moment of coming onto the stage after climbing the stairs, you wouldn't just take, again, 10 minutes before you do that and imagine walking from the garden, like, and that's all the work. No, you're like, it's repeated over and over and over again. What you're doing is you are neurally reinforcing through neuroplasticity. You're practicing, you're wiring, you're firing to wire in such a way so that you become that grocery delivery man. You're not just playing the role, like, you become him in that moment. And this is why when it comes to our grief and when it comes to how we combat our shame, telling a new story requires that same degree of persevering practice over and over and over again. So for your neighbor, that moment will be important, and it will be important for him to have with others additional practiced moments.
Yeah.
So that it becomes a story that is more compelling than the one my shame attendant is telling.
Right.
Amy, did you have another story?
I do. I'll tell it quickly.
Okay,
it kind of ties in with monitoring the cookies. And
I'm so sorry. Like, that's just really true. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, so I was in a class and we were all talking about the projects that we were working on and the things, the progression and what we had gotten done. And all of us had things that we had gotten done. I shared mine, others shared theirs. The instructor called out two of the people and just praised them for what they had gotten done. And I'm like, my chopped liver? And
my Amy.
I'm going to talk about my Amy, not you, Amy, but my Amy, which is another Amy. And
he lives in Miami.
Bodega Bay. And I felt so young. And this is where it kind of ties in with the cookies. I felt so young in that wanting the instructor. I wanted to say, hello, like I need you to notice what I've accomplished. And that feels so young. And I don't know if this connects with, you said in the book, I'll misquote it, but our anticipated future often comes from the age that you could probably finish that for me, that we're viewing it from, that our perspective is from. And I felt so young, like, and I even said to myself, Amy Chella, do you really need her to notice you? And I'm like, yeah, I do. Yeah, I do.
Right. That would be kind of like your attendant kind of like slips in and says like, hey, you don't really need that affirmation.
Right. You don't really have anything to affirm anyway, but. But the anticipated future, what are you thinking, Pep?
I'm soaking it in. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'll just say this. I'm working on this other book project. And hopefully down the line, we'll have another podcast series to talk about this, but it involves the questions of suffering and questions of hope.
Oh, another uplifting. Oh, well, there's hope. That's good. Kurt's oeuvre.
The title.
Kurt's oeuvre is
the title is
shame.
Sorry, the
suffering.
title is the title is The Shame of Hopeless Suffering.
Oh gosh!
Hurry up.
Yeah. It's only going to be about a 20-page book. It's
sure.
getting, yeah. But I'm thinking about this notion that hope is, when we imagine hope, we imagine hope as a function of what we think our future is to be. Like I'm hoping in something, whether it's 5 minutes from now or 5 years or decades or whatever. But what's also interesting about that is that this the stories that we live in. This is one other thing that we didn't, as part of being human storytellers. It does. We utilize our capacity to imagine a past and imagine a future. Right. Anytime you watch a good movie, you're not just watching it moment by moment by moment. You're taking in what's just happened in the last 5 or 30 minutes, but you're anticipating what's coming. Some movies are really, kind of like, I was thinking earlier today as we were approaching this, I'm thinking, when I saw, when I was, I forget whatever, it would have been 1980, when The Empire Strikes Back was released, I had never had a moment in a movie as I had at the end of The Empire Strikes Back. And I mean, whatever else your opinion is about that entire series of its, script and all the things, it was one of the most gripping moments that I've ever had in watching a movie. Because it was so blindsiding. Like there were people who were probably far smarter and who probably saw it coming and so forth. Like I wasn't one of them. And that whole sense of like, oh, I wonder what happened to Luke's dad. Gosh, I'm sure that we'll be told about that somewhere. Like that's what I'm anticipating. Like that's not a future that I saw coming, nor was it a future that he saw coming. And it changes everything about the future that he then thinks about. And that anticipated future cycles right back in, and it is now shaping and telling the story of my present moment. And so this also becomes part of what's important for us, is that we're telling stories in a way to change my future, so that that anticipated future can also come back and change my present moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you have that moment, Pep, where the director says, like, you know, what happened to the elevator? I can imagine that either in that moment or in the, you know, moments or hours or days or whatever that followed, there was a shift in your anticipated future. Like, you know, I've done, this is really important. This is effective. It like, whether it's a matter of like, oh, I have greater confidence in my future because I'm clearly doing something, which also then circles right back. It's like, oh, it informs what I'm now going to do, what I'm going to tell right now.
Yeah. And I think the added interesting thing about that is, had she not been intuitive, had she not been out in the audience and come back and said something, I wouldn't have had the same.
Oh my gosh.
I wouldn't have known.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You know,
the fact that she even shared with you.
Yeah.
I mean, makes all the difference.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That whole notion that our listeners are contributing. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, you know, we as listeners, this is what's really important, is that, like, we are so often unaware of the significance of the role we play in the story that anybody else is telling who's in our presence at any given time. I mean, the clerk at Safeway.
right.
Know,
that's the whole thing behind It's a Wonderful Life, right? I mean, having no idea that you had any impact on anybody or anything, and then being shown what your impact actually was. The trick is to be able to see it in real time. It'd be helpful.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, indeed.
Okay.
All right, guys.
All right.
This was fun.
Right on.
Shame can be fun. Time. I'm glad I'm doing it with you guys.
Shame can be fun. That's a bumper sticker. All right. Love you guys.
You too.
Love you. All right.